My name is Tony Mercer, and I've worked as a caver for most of my adult life. Not recreationally, not as a thrill seeker. I mean professionally. Mapping systems, assisting with recoveries, checking old mines, and guiding people who have no business being underground without someone who knows what they're doing. Most of my work has been in Appalachia, where the cave systems run deep, old, and mostly undocumented. If you've seen The Descent or read about Ted the Caver, you already have a frame of reference. Some of that stuff is exaggerated, some isn't. The part that's usually missing is how people survive these places more than once. Panic isn't what gets you out. Strength doesn't either. What keeps you alive are rules, specific ones, that exist because something happened badly enough that someone felt the need to warn the next person. Most caves are dangerous in predictable ways. Loose rock, low oxygen, bad footing, you can train for that. You prepare, you mitigate risk. Rock behaves like rock. Sound echoes the way sound should. Air moves where it's supposed to move. But not every cave follows those rules. The system I'm writing about sits deep in the Appalachian Range, far from any tourist access or marked trail. There's no sign pointing toward it. No fence, no warning placard. Just a narrow opening hidden by brush and stone, and a steady draft of cold air coming from a place that never sees sunlight. You don't find it by accident. Someone has to tell you where it is. The first time I went in, I wasn't alone. I was with Forrest Hale, who grew up in northern Georgia and carried himself like someone who didn't waste energy reacting to things until they actually mattered. Forrest had a slow southern drawl, steady hands, and the kind of calm you only get after spending years underground when things go wrong. He trusted his instincts more than equipment, and they'd keep him alive longer than most. The third was Laura Bennett. Laura was precise, careful, without being timid. She noticed changes in the cave before anybody else. Airflow shifts, subtle sounds, places where the rock felt wrong under your hand. She didn't talk much while moving, but when she did, it was because something needed attention. I trusted her judgment completely. We'd been inside parts of that system before, but on one trip we pushed farther than usual, past the sections we knew, past the points where most people turned back, deep enough that the rock stopped looking familiar and the air felt heavier. And that was when I saw it. Carved directly into the stone wall of a narrow chamber, far enough inside that no one would do it casually, were 6 rules, not written in chalk, not scratched by a knife. They were cut into the rock, deep grooves worn smooth around the edges by time and moisture. Whoever carved them hadn't rushed. Each line was very deliberate. They were numbered 1 through 6. No explanation, no symbols, just the rules. I stood there for a long time, reading them over and over. I didn't understand most of them at first. Some didn't make sense at all. Forrest was quiet when he saw them. Laura took pictures and didn't say a word. I took a photo too. At the time, I thought they were a warning left by someone who got spooked. Maybe a joke. Maybe superstition carved in stone by miners or early cavers who didn't know any better. I was wrong. Over the years that followed, I learned exactly why each rule was there, one at a time. The hard way. Rule number 1. If you see green frogs, do not lick them. The first rule was carved deeper than the rest. I noticed that. The grooves were wider, more worn, as if more hands had traced over it than the others. Either that, or it'd simply been there longer. At the time, I thought it was a joke. I mean, who needs to be told not to lick a frog? I didn't say that out loud. Forrest was standing a few feet back, headlamp angled toward the ceiling, checking for fractures. Laura was photographing the wall with her phone, making sure to get the carving from different angles. Still, the thought crossed my mind. Of all the dangers underground, collapse, bad air, disorientation. That was the first rule someone chose to carve into stone? I wouldn't have laughed if I'd known what lived deeper in the system. Now, we didn't see frogs that day. Not on the first trip after finding the rules, anyway. We finished our survey, backed out the way we came, and didn't think much more about it. I remember joking about it later over coffee, calling it common sense carved in limestone. Laura didn't laugh. Forrest didn't either. It was weeks later when we ran into him. We were deeper than usual, past a section where the ceiling dropped low enough that you had to crawl on your stomach for a good 30 feet before it opened up again. The air down there felt thick, humid in a way that didn't match the rest of the cave. There was no standing water, no stream, no drip you could point to and say that's why. Just damp stone and a smell I couldn't place at first. Forrest noticed them before I did. "Don't move," he said quietly. That got my attention. Forrest didn't stop people unless he had a reason. I froze where I was, one knee down, 1 foot planted, headlamp steady. "What is it?" I asked. "Look," he said, real slow. I followed his beam. At first I thought they were boulders, rounded shapes scattered across the floor of the chamber, clustered near the walls. And then one of them moved. It wasn't a hop or a crawl. It was more like a slow adjustment, a heavy body settling its weight. And that was when my brain finally caught up and understood what I was looking at. Frogs. Big green ones. Bright, unnatural green, like fresh paint that hadn't dried yet. Their skin wasn't slimy the way you'd expect. It was almost velvety, stretched tight over thick bodies. Each one was about the size of a small dog, bigger than any frog had a right to be. Wide backs, thick hind legs folded beneath them, front limbs tucked in close. Their eyes were yellow, not gold or amber, yellow, like old headlights. They didn't blink. They just stared, mouths slightly open. There were 6 of them I could see. Laura whispered my name, barely audible. "Tony," she said. "I feel weird." I turned my head slowly, careful not to take my eyes off the frogs. Laura was standing closer to them, and her posture had changed. Her shoulders were loose, her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. "I'm fine," she said, even though I hadn't asked. "They're kind of beautiful, aren't they?" And that was when I felt it too. It wasn't a voice or a sound. It was more like a suggestion, planted gently and repeatedly. A pull. A calm, steady urge to take one step closer. Just one. To reach out, to touch the skin, to see what it felt like. My mouth filled with saliva. Forrest swore under his breath and grabbed Laura's arm hard enough that she yelped. The sound snapped something in my head, like breaking the surface of water, and I realized I'd been leaning forward without meaning to. "Back up," Forrest said. His voice was louder now, sharper. "Now." Laura blinked rapidly, confusion washing over her. "Why, what's wrong?" I didn't answer. I just grabbed her other arm, and together Forrest and I pulled her back, step by step, slow enough not to spook the frogs. My heart was hammering, but I kept my breathing steady. The frogs didn't move. They didn't hop towards us or chase us. They just sat there, watching, mouths open, throats pulsing gently as they breathed. As we retreated, one of them croaked. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was low and rhythmic, almost soothing. Another frog answered it. Then another. and soon all of them were croaking in a slow overlapping pattern that made my head feel light. Laura stumbled. Forrest caught her before she went down. "Don't listen," he said to her. "Don't look." We backed out of the chamber. The croaking followed us for a while, echoing through the tunnels, and then faded as the air shifted and the sound finally died. We didn't stop moving until we were a good distance away. Laura sat down hard against the wall, breathing fast. "What the hell was that?" she asked. I felt like I was going to pass out." Forrest didn't answer right away. He stared down the tunnel we'd come from, jaw tight. "That's why the rule's there," he said finally. I thought about the carving, the deep grooves, the worn stone. People actually... "Yeah," Forrest interrupted. Later, after we were back above ground, he told us what he knew. Not theories or rumors, actual reports. People who encountered the frogs and ignored the rule didn't die right away. The frogs secreted a toxin through their skin. Not fast-acting, not painful. It soaked in through the tongue, through the mouth. Paralysis followed. Hallucinations. Complete loss of muscle control. Victims would collapse where they stood, and then the frogs would move. Their jaws unhinged wider than should have been possible, and they swallowed their prey whole, slowly. Some people were found later, those who'd been only partially consumed before something scared the frogs off. Others were never found at all. Forrest told us about one man who'd survived. Barely. He'd been pulled out by his partner before the frogs finished. His skin was burned raw. His tongue swollen to twice its size, and he was missing 2 fingers and most of the muscle from one calf. The man couldn't explain why he'd done it, why he leaned in, touched the frog, and licked it. He just said it felt like the right thing to do at the time. When we went back into the cave weeks later, the frogs were gone. Or maybe they just went deeper. Either way, I never forgot the way they watched us. Patient. When I look at the carving now, if you see green frogs, do not lick them. I don't think it's a joke anymore. I don't think it's obvious. I think it's the kind of rule someone only writes down after watching something terrible happen. I always follow it. Rule number 2. Always mark your path. The second rule didn't stand out the way the first one did. Wasn't dramatic or strange. It was the kind of thing every caver already knows. Which is probably why it gets ignored more often. Always mark your path. When I first read it carved into the rock, I remember thinking it was unnecessary, almost insulting. Anyone who's been underground more than a handful of times knows that rule already. You don't just wander into a cave and hope muscle memory gets you back. The problem is familiarity. This rule exists because familiarity is dangerous. The incident that made it stick happened months after we found the carvings. It wasn't in a deep system or an unmapped section. It was in a cave we'd been through more times than I could count. And that is what nearly killed us. The cave was a known Appalachian limestone system with multiple entrances, looping passages, and several large chambers connected by low corridors. Nothing extreme. No squeezes that would trap you or vertical drops. The kind of place people get real comfortable in. Forrest had been in it dozens of times. Laura had guided there before. I knew the general layout well enough that I didn't even bother pulling the map before we went in. And that should have been my first warning sign. We entered mid-morning. Clear weather, no rush, no pressure, just a short survey to check a section that had reportedly shifted after heavy rain. In and out. That was the plan. We didn't mark the trail. Not with tape, not with chalk, not even with simple reference marks. The thinking was simple and stupid. We know this cave. Well, for the first 40 minutes, everything was exactly as expected. Same wide passages, same worn stone, same places where the ceiling dipped low enough that you had to duck without thinking about it. Headlamps steady, backup lights checked, plenty of battery life. We reached the section we were there to inspect, a side passage that branched off from a larger corridor. The floor was slick with mud, and the ceiling had dropped a little since the last time we'd been there, but nothing serious. No collapse or instability. We noted it, took measurements, snapped a few photos, and then we turned around to leave. And that was when things started to go wrong. The main corridor looked the same. That's the problem. In limestone caves, especially older ones, everything erodes in similar patterns. Same curves and textures, same dull gray color. Once you're inside long enough, your brain starts filling in details that aren't actually there. We walked for about 10 minutes before Laura stopped. "This doesn't feel right," she said. Forrest frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well, we should have hit the wider chamber by now." I checked my watch. She was right. We'd been walking longer than expected. I slowed, scanning the walls, trying to spot something familiar. A crack, a marking, anything. Nothing jumped out. "Maybe we took the longer loop," I said, though I wasn't confident. We kept moving. 5 minutes later, Forrest stopped this time. "Yeah, that turn back there, I don't remember that being there." I turned around. The passage behind us split into two. Both looked equally worn, equally traveled. Neither had any obvious distinguishing features. And I felt the first real flicker of unease then. "All right," I said, let's just slow down." We chose the left passage. Another 10 minutes passed. The air felt heavier, not because anything had changed, but because we were starting to breathe harder. Laura kept glancing behind us. Forrest adjusted his headlamp twice, angling it differently, like he was trying to force familiarity out of the rock. And then my light flickered. Just once. Quick enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. I checked the battery indicator. Lower than it should have been. And that's when the cave stopped feeling like a place and started feeling like a big problem. We stopped completely. No talking, just listening to our own breathing. "All right, we need to pick a direction and commit," Forrest said. "And if it's wrong?" Laura asked. I didn't answer right away. We chose the right passage this time. The ceiling dropped lower. The floor sloped unevenly. The air felt stale. My light flickered again, longer this time. I slowed my pace without realizing it, and that's when Forrest's light went out. Just off. "Shit," he said quietly. He slapped the side of his headlamp. Nothing. He switched to his backup. Dimmer, narrower beam, but it worked. "All right, we need to move now," I said. Panic doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in through small failures sometimes. A wrong turn, a dead light, a familiar place becoming unfamiliar. Laura's breathing was shallow now. She kept close behind me, one hand on my pack so she wouldn't drift off course in the dark. My light flickered again. We walked faster. And every passage started to look wrong. Every turn felt like a mistake. I tried to picture the map in my head and couldn't. The mental image, it kept slipping away, replaced by stone and darkness and the sound of our boots scraping mud. And then my light died. Complete darkness. I froze instinctively, heart slamming into my ribs. "Tony?" Laura said. Her voice was tight. "I'm here," I said, forcing calm. "Backup light." My hand shook as I fumbled for it, and when it clicked on, the beam was weak, barely enough to see 10 feet ahead. Forest backup was fading too. We stood there for a moment. 3 people in a cave we thought we knew, relying on lights that were actively failing. "This is my fault," I said. "We should have marked it." Forrest didn't argue. Laura didn't either. We moved again, slower now, sticking close, careful not to waste battery. Every decision felt heavy. Every turn could be the last wrong one. Finally, after many hours, we felt air moving. A faint draft, cool against my face. We followed it. The beam from my backup caught a faint glow ahead. Daylight. We stumbled out of the entrance, collapsing onto the ground like we just finished a marathon. And my light died completely seconds later. We sat there in silence for a long time. There were no monsters this time, no strange sounds, no supernatural explanation. Just 3 experienced cavers who made a terrible decision and nearly paid for it. A week later, when I stood in front of the carved rules again, I understood why the second one existed. Always mark your path, not because the cave changes, but because you do. You forget things sometimes. You get confused. And you don't always get lucky. Rule 3. If you go underground alone, always bring Tic Tacs. Now, when I read the 3rd rule carved into the rock, it bothered me more than the others. Not because it was scary, but because it made no sense. If you go underground alone, always bring Tic Tacs. Not food or sugar or candy. Tic Tacs. Specific. Narrow. No explanation, no variation. Forrest stared at it for a long moment, and then shook his head. "That's weird," he said. "Why not just say snacks?" Laura crouched to get a closer look at the carving. "Doesn't look like a joke," she said. "Someone took their time with this." I agreed with that much. The grooves were deliberate and deep. Whoever carved the rules didn't rush, and they did not improvise. They wrote exactly what they meant. Still, I didn't understand the rule. I didn't understand it even a week later, standing inside a gas station just off the highway, grabbing supplies for an early morning cave check. It was a nothing stop. One of those places you pull into without thinking. Faded signage, humming lights, shelves packed too tight. I grabbed water, jerky, batteries, normal stuff. And as I walked toward the counter, my eyes landed on a small rack of mints. Tic Tacs. I stared at them. The rule crossed my mind. I hadn't planned to go in alone that day, but plans change, schedules shift. And even if they didn't, the rule didn't say only bring them if you're alone. It said always bring them if you're alone. And I figured having them couldn't hurt. What the hell? I grabbed a box. I didn't think it was important. I didn't think it meant anything. I just tossed them in my pack and paid. The solo run happened 3 days later. Forrest was out of state. Laura had another commitment. The cave wasn't deep or new, and it wasn't dangerous by any reasonable standard. I needed to check airflow in a known side passage after a stretch of heavy rain. In and out. 30 minutes, maybe 40. I debated waiting. And then I told myself, I'd been underground alone dozens of times without issue. I had gear and experience. I had backup plans. I didn't think about the Tic Tacs again until much later. The cave entrance was quiet that morning. Cool air rolling out, steady and familiar. I checked my watch, logged my entry time, and went in. The first part of the route was wide enough to walk upright. The stone walls were smooth, worn by water over centuries. My headlamp caught a clean beam ahead of me. Everything was normal. The side passage I was checking branched off from the main corridor at a shallow angle. It sloped downward gently, then leveled out. I made my way in, checking airflow with a strip of tape, pausing occasionally to feel the rock for instability. No issues. I reached the turnaround point, marked my notes, and headed back. And that was when I realized something was wrong. The passage looked slightly different coming back. Not enough to set off alarms immediately, but enough to make me slow down. The ceiling felt lower. The walls seemed closer together. I brushed it off as fatigue and kept moving. And then I reached a junction that should not have been there. I stopped. I stood still, letting my breathing settle, scanning the walls carefully. 2 passages, both sloped upward, both looked equally worn. I was certain, absolutely certain, that there had only been one way back. I checked my watch again. I hadn't been inside long. Wasn't panicking yet. I chose the left passage. It narrowed quickly, forcing me to turn sideways to keep moving. The floor dipped sharply, and I had to brace myself against the wall to avoid slipping. I didn't like that, but I kept going, expecting it to open up again. It didn't. I turned around. The slope I'd just descended looked steeper from this angle. The opening felt smaller. I tried climbing back up, and my boots slipped on damp stone. I tried again, slower. On the third attempt, a chunk of rock shifted under my weight and slid down, wedging itself awkwardly near the narrowest part of the passage. The opening was still there, just not comfortably. I backed away and sat down hard on the stone floor, heart pounding. Okay, that's not good. Talking helped a little, kept my thoughts from spiraling. I checked my gear, primary light steady, backup lights untouched, plenty of battery life, water, food, radio no signal. But that wasn't surprising. The rock was thick here. I wasn't trapped yet. I stood and took the other passage. 10 minutes later, I realized I was completely disoriented. The walls looked identical no matter which direction I turned. The floor sloped inconsistently, sometimes down, sometimes up. My internal sense of direction, usually reliable, was gone. Every turn felt wrong. I stopped again. And that was when my primary light flickered. Just once. I stared at it, waiting for another flicker. It stayed on, but the beam felt weaker somehow, like it wasn't reaching as far. I switched to my backup light immediately. I moved slower now, counting steps, keeping one hand on the wall at all times. My breathing was louder than I liked. After a while, long enough that I stopped checking my watch, I remembered the rule: if you go underground alone, always bring Tic Tacs. I frowned, reaching into my pack more out of habit than belief. My fingers closed around the small plastic box immediately, and I pulled it out and stared at it. Bright white lid, green lettering, completely out of place in the dark. Why would this matter? I said. I shook the box lightly. The sound was sharp, loud in the confined space. Then I heard movement. It sounded like something flapping its wings, and then a faint scrape above me. I angled my light upward, and perched on a narrow ledge near the ceiling was a crow. Black and white feathers, sharp beak, pale eyes reflecting my light. It shouldn't have been there, Birds don't fly that deep underground. There was no food, no light, no reason for it to be there. It didn't move or make a sound. It just watched me. I didn't move either. And then, slowly, for a reason I still don't understand, I opened the Tic Tac box. The sound echoed again, and the crow shifted, hopping once closer along the ledge. I took a Tic Tac out and held it up on my palm. The crow tilted its head, studying me, then leaned forward and plucked it gently from my hand. Then it turned and flew. Not erratically, not circling, straight down a passage I hadn't tried yet. It landed once, looked back at me, and stayed there. And I didn't think about it or question it, I just followed. The passage sloped upward. The air felt fresher with every step. My backup light dimmed further, barely holding on. The crow flew again, and then vanished around a bend. And seconds later, I saw daylight. I stepped out of the cave and I sat on the ground for a long time after that, staring at the entrance. I don't know exactly why Tic Tacs matter. I don't know why that crow showed up. What I do know is this. I brought those Tic Tacs on a whim, and if I hadn't, I would not have survived. Rule 4. If the walls start breathing, run. The fourth rule was the shortest one carved into the rock. No explanation or qualifiers, just a sentence that didn't leave room for interpretation. If the walls start breathing, run. When I first read it, I assumed it was shorthand, a warning about unstable rock, condensation, pressure shifts, something you could explain away with geology if you wanted to. Limestone caves, they do strange things. Expansion, contraction, water pressure, changing the way surfaces look under a headlamp. That's what I told myself. But over the years, I heard the same story 3 times. Different people, different caves, same description. The first account came from a woman named Amy Madigan. No, not the actress. Amy wasn't inexperienced. She'd been caving for years and had assisted on multiple survey and rescue operations. She wasn't reckless, and she wasn't prone to exaggeration. I trusted her judgment, which is why I listened when she told me what happened. Her incident occurred near the entrance of an old mine tunnel that connected to a natural cave system. The opening was wide enough to walk through upright, and daylight was visible from where she'd been working. She and her team had been mapping side passages when she slipped and twisted her ankle badly enough that she couldn't put weight on it. The decision was made quickly. 2 people would head out to get help. Amy would stay put near the entrance, where there was airflow and enough room to sit upright. They secured her, checked her supplies, and left. She told me that at first, everything felt normal. She sat with her back against the stone, headlamp on low to conserve battery, listening to the sounds of the cave. Water dripping somewhere deeper in, faint echoes of her teammates moving away. And then the silence changed. The dripping stopped. The echoes faded. She shifted her position, and that was when she noticed the wall in front of her wasn't still anymore. She described it as subtle at first, a barely perceptible movement beneath the stone, like watching fabric settle, she said. The surface seemed to rise and fall, just a fraction of an inch. Amy told me she stared at it for a long time, trying to convince herself it was a trick of the light. She waved her hand in front of the beam, changed angles, blinked, but the movement didn't stop. The wall wasn't cracking or crumbling. It was expanding and contracting, slow and steady, like a chest drawing breath. Then it happened again, more pronounced this time. The stone bulged outward slightly before easing back. That was when she tried to move. She grabbed her pack and dragged herself away from the wall, ignoring the pain in her ankle. As she did, she noticed the tunnel behind her narrowing, drawing inward, like the space itself was tightening. That was when she saw the teeth. They didn't erupt all at once. They emerged gradually from the stone, pale and smooth at first, then sharpening as they extended. Rows of them embedded in what she'd thought was solid rock moments earlier. And then the eye opened. One eye, huge and wet, set deep within the tunnel wall. It rolled slowly, focusing on her. Amy screamed. She told me she could hear other screams too, echoing from deeper in the system. Her teammates. The tunnel began to close. Not in a collapse or a rock fall, the walls just drew together evenly, the teeth sliding past each other as the opening narrowed. Amy said she watched the light from deeper inside vanish as the tunnel sealed itself shut, and then everything went still. She was found hours later by a rescue team that couldn't explain what had happened. There was no collapse blocking the passage, no debris, no broken rock. But the tunnel Amy claimed had been there earlier was completely gone. Her teammates were never found. Not a single trace of them. I thought Amy's story was an anomaly until I heard the second account. The second survivor was a man named Rick Bowman, a former miner who had been exploring abandoned shafts with a small group. His description matched Amy's in every major detail. The silence, the movement, the breathing walls, the teeth. Rick's incident happened deeper underground, far from any entrance. He was separated from the rest of his group by a bend in the tunnel when he felt the walls shift. He didn't see the eye because he didn't stay long enough. Rick ran. He described the tunnel behind him compressing as he moved, the stone flexing inward, narrowing the space just inches behind his shoulders. He tore skin from his arms, squeezing through a section that hadn't been that tight before. He made it out alone, but the rest of his group didn't. The third account was the one that finally convinced me there was no exaggeration. It came from a rescue report. A team responding to a missing person call found evidence of a sudden disappearance deep inside a mine-connected cave system. Equipment crushed inward, not buried. Helmets warped as if compressed evenly from all sides. No signs of a collapse or exit blockage. When I look back at the carving now, if the walls start breathing, run. I don't think it's poetic language, and I don't think it's shorthand. I think it's literal. Now, I've never seen the walls breathe myself, but I have stood in places underground where things felt wrong, where the stone seems just a little closer than it had been seconds earlier. And every time that happens, I leave immediately. No gear check or discussion, no waiting to see if it gets worse. You don't study that phenomenon. You don't document it. You just run. Because the people who stayed long enough to understand it, they never came back. Rule number 5. If you come across ghost miners, stay with them for a while. The fifth rule didn't explain itself either. No dates or locations or extra markings. Just that. At the time, it was the only rule that didn't tell you how to survive something directly. Didn't say run or avoid. Didn't say bring anything. It told you to stop and do the opposite of what instinct would demand. Forrest was the one who explained what it meant. He didn't volunteer the information right away. We'd been quiet for a long time after finding the carvings, standing there with our lights trained on the rock, reading and rereading. "That one," Forrest said eventually. "That one's real old." He told us about the McGrath mining collapse of 1934, a coal mine cut too deep into unstable rock, support failure, 33 men underground when it happened. Rescue crews worked for days, but the tunnels kept shifting. Every attempt to reach them made things worse, and eventually the mine was sealed and abandoned. No bodies recovered. That history alone was unsettling, but it didn't explain the rule. Well, the incident happened during a routine survey of a natural cave system that intersected with old mining tunnels. We weren't looking for anything unusual. We didn't intend to go anywhere near the old workings. But underground, intent doesn't matter much. Rock shifts, water carves new routes, old passages open where they shouldn't. We were moving through a narrow limestone corridor when the stone became rougher, straighter and less organic. Tool marks cut into the walls, half eroded but still visible. Rusted metal fused into the rock in places. A length of old timber, blackened and soft with rot, jutted out from the ceiling. Forrest stopped immediately. "This is a mine," he said quietly. Laura checked her map. "That doesn't make sense," she said. And that was when we heard the voice. "Hello? Is someone there?" It was a man's voice. Adult, tired. Forrest didn't move or speak. He raised one hand slowly, palm down, telling us to stay where we were. "Please, I can hear you," the voice said. Laura took a step forward without thinking. Forrest caught her by the sleeve. "That's one of them," he whispered. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that it couldn't be. That this had to be something else, another caver or explorer. Somebody alive. But the deeper part of me already knew that wasn't true. The voice came again, clearer now. "Hello. We've been trapped for a while, but they'll be coming looking for us any time now." The word "us" hit hard. I stepped closer to the collapsed section of tunnel, careful not to touch anything. My headlamp illuminated a wall of fallen rock, jagged, packed tight, no clear opening. But there were gaps, narrow cracks between stones where air moved faintly in and out. "I can hear you," I said. "What's your name?" "Thomas," he said. "Thomas McGrath." Forrest closed his eyes. How long have you been down here, Thomas?" I asked. "Not long. Just since the shift started. There was a loud noise and everything went dark. We've been waiting." I didn't ask what year it was, or how old he was. I didn't correct him when he said "we." Forrest lowered himself to the ground and sat, back against the stone wall. Laura hesitated, eyes wet, then did the same. And I followed. That was the rule. Stay with them. So we did. We stayed there. Lights low, packs off. "So, what kind of work you do, Thomas?" I asked. "Coal," he began. "I've been at it since I was a boy. My father, too." "Do you have family?" Laura asked. "Yes," he said. "A wife. 2 kids. One's a new baby girl." Laura looked at Forrest, then at me. And we talked with him like that for a long time. We asked him about his work, his life, the men he was trapped with. He told us about the noise, the dust, how dark it got afterward. He said some of the men were hurt, but most were okay. Scared, but okay. "They're rested now," he said. "We're conserving our strength." At one point, he asked if we could spare some water. Forrest nodded to me. I pulled my bottle from my pack, and I carefully threaded the tube through one of the gaps in the rock. It took time, and I didn't rush. When Thomas took a drink, he sighed with relief. "Thank you. I have not had a drink in a long time." As time passed, his voice grew softer, slower. "They'll be looking for us any time now," he said again, his voice tired but hopeful. Forrest shot me a brief look, then nodded. We didn't promise rescue. We didn't tell him help was on the way, and we didn't say he was getting out. We let him believe what he needed to believe. Eventually, his voice trailed off. Long pauses stretched between sentences. Then silence. We stayed seated. Minutes passed, then more. Laura wiped her face with the back of her glove, shoulders shaking quietly. Forrest stayed still, eyes closed, breathing slow. When we finally stood up to leave, the tunnel was silent. There was no voice anymore. When I think about that rule now, I understand it better than the others. They know, somewhere deep down, they know they aren't getting out. Maybe they know they're already dead. But they don't want to be alone. They want company. So if you ever hear a miner working where no one should be, or a voice calling from behind the rock, don't argue with it. Don't correct it. Don't tell them the truth they already sense. Just sit down, be good to them, then stay a while. Rule 6. If you see a German Shepherd underground, follow it. I didn't understand that rule for a long time. I'd been underground for years by then. I'd seen animals wander into cave entrances, bats, snakes, raccoons. I'd even seen a stray dog once, near daylight, skittish and half-starved. But deep underground, far past natural light, that didn't make sense. Forrest didn't comment on that one when we first found it. Neither did Laura. We took pictures, logged the carvings, and moved on. I didn't think about the rule again until the rescue call came in. It was late afternoon when we got the call. A partial collapse in an active cave system used for guided tours and training runs. Not a deep mine or a remote system, but one of the safer ones. Or at least it was supposed to be. 2 people were unaccounted for. A man in his 30s and a young girl, 8 years old. Father and daughter. They'd been part of a small group moving through a narrow section when a support slab gave way. The rest of the group made it out. Those 2 didn't. Forrest and I responded immediately. Laura was already nearby with another team and met us at the staging area. Rescue operations underground are chaos wrapped in procedure. Everybody knows their role, but nothing ever goes cleanly. Radios cut out, dust hangs in the air. Time stretches out. We entered through a secondary access point, moving fast but careful. The collapse wasn't total, more of a choke point filled with debris, the kind that traps without fully sealing. We could hear them before we saw them. The man was shouting hoarsely, voice cracking. The girl was crying, weak and scared, but alive. That mattered. That meant time still mattered. We were working our way toward him when I saw movement ahead. At first, I thought it was another rescuer. And then my light caught the shape properly. A dog. A big German Shepherd. Standing in the tunnel ahead of us, calm and steady. ears forward, eyes reflecting the beam of my headlamp. No dust on its coat, no signs of panic, just waiting for us. Forrest stopped dead. The dog turned and started walking deeper into the cave, moving like it knew exactly where it was going. I remembered the rule then, and Forrest remembered it too. "Follow it," he said. We moved. The tunnel narrowed slightly, tighter than I would have chosen under normal circumstances. The dog moved through it without slowing. We followed, scraping packs and shoulders against stone, breathing hard. The air grew thicker with dust. The sound of the trapped man and girl faded, replaced by the dull thud of shifting rock somewhere deeper. The dog stopped at a break in the tunnel wall, a small opening I wouldn't have noticed if it hadn't been standing right there, just wide enough to squeeze through. The dog looked back at us once, and then went through. We followed, and on the other side was a low chamber, partially shielded from the collapse by a natural rock rib. And that was where they were. The man was pinned by debris across his legs, bleeding but conscious. The girl was curled against his chest, crying softly. When the dog stepped into the light, the girl saw it and gasped. "A doggy," she said weakly. The man looked up, stunned. We worked fast. Laura stabilized the girl while Forrest assessed the debris. I took position near the father, talking to him, keeping him focused. The dog stayed close, watching, occasionally moving just enough to stay out of the way, calm and alert. We freed the man's legs enough to move him, and then got the girl into my arms. She clung to my neck immediately, sobbing into my shoulder. "It's okay," I told her, "I've got you." The dog moved ahead as we started back, and we didn't question the route, we followed. The tunnel the dog led us through wasn't the shortest, but it was stable. No loose stone or sharp drops, no tight squeezes that would have slowed us down carrying injured people. At one point, another rescuer called over the radio, asking where we were. Forrest gave coordinates that didn't match the main routes. We reached daylight, just as my legs started to shake from exhaustion. Outside, medics rushed in, taking the man and the girl from us. The girl was alive. The man was alive. Both injured and scared, but breathing. And that was when I noticed the dog again. It stood a short distance away, watching me. As the medics worked, the dog turned toward the tree line. I took a step toward it. "Hey," I said without thinking. The dog paused, and I saw the collar then. Old leather, cracked, worn smooth with age. Stamped into the metal tag were 2 words. "Old Sarge," it read. The dog looked at me once, just once, and then it ran into the woods and was gone. Later, when things had calmed down, I asked around. Nobody had brought a dog underground. Nobody had seen it enter. An old rescuer pulled me aside when I described it. "Old Sarge," he said quietly. "Yeah, I heard of him." When I think about the rules now, that last one makes sense in a way the others don't. The frogs will kill you. Getting lost will kill you. Darkness will kill you. Some things underground don't let you leave. But sometimes, rarely, something down there helps. And if it does, you don't question it. You don't hesitate. You follow. Because that rule wasn't carved for curiosity. It was carved because someone survived. Well, I'm a bit older now, but I still go back to that place sometimes. The chamber where the rules are carved hasn't changed much. The stone is smoother now, worn by time and water. But the words are still there if you know where to look. I stand there longer than I need to, reading them over the way I did the first time. There are 6 rules. Don't lick the green frogs. Always mark your path. If you go underground alone, bring Tic Tacs. If the walls start breathing, run. If you come across ghost miners, stay with them for a while. And if you see a German Shepherd underground, follow it. They don't replace training or equipment. They don't make you invincible by any means. They exist alongside the basics, the things every caver is taught on day one. People die underground for ordinary reasons. Rockfall, bad air, equipment failure, getting lost, doing something real stupid and not realizing it until it's too late. Those are the common ones. But every now and then, something else happens. Something that doesn't fit neatly into a report or a safety briefing. Something you won't hear about unless you've been around long enough or you've seen it yourself. That's why the rules are there. Not to explain anything or scare anyone, just to warn the next person. If you ever go underground, be mindful. Take your time, pay attention. Remember that the dark doesn't care how confident you feel or how many times you've done it before. And most of the time, you'll make it back out. But if you don't, it won't matter whether it was nature, carelessness, or something much worse that took you. Down there, the difference doesn't mean much. So remember the rules and be careful. My name is Riley. I make my living going where most divers don't even like to look. Black water, no visibility, no sound except the regulator pulling breath in and out. I've been doing this for, 16 years. Started small. Springs, sinkholes, flooded quarries. Moved deeper every season. You do enough of these dives, you stop thinking about the surface as home. You start to feel more honest under pressure. The noise in your head fades. The world up there runs too fast, full of people pretending they know what they're doing. Down here, you either know or you die. My father used to take me spearfishing when I was a kid. We'd go off the panhandle, out past the oil rigs, where the water turns that heavy green, He'd tell me, "Don't fight the ocean, boy. It doesn't care." He died when I was 19. Boat accident, not even a storm. I remember standing on the dock, looking out at nothing but glass water, thinking it looked like a lie. Since then, I spent most of my life below it. I guess that's how I make sense of things, by getting close enough to the dark until I can see what's inside it. People call me the best in the business. They do. That's not modest, it's just math. I have done over 300 certified cave dives, logged a few dozen unofficial ones that get me blacklisted if anybody ever saw the footage. I have mapped systems that weren't even on the charts. Rescued a team once that got trapped 3 chambers in. 2 of them made it out. The company that hired me put my face in a brochure after that. Riley Quinn. The deep doesn't scare him. Looked good in print. I liked it. I won't lie about that. That's the thing about a reputation. At first, it's a reward, and then it becomes a leash. People start expecting miracles, and once they do, you start believing you owe them one. You start to push the edge a little harder each time, just to stay the person they think you are. I've made peace with that. It's the cost of being known for something most people are too afraid to try. Lately, I've been working contracts for private biotech outfits. They don't care about maps or records, just samples. Strange bacteria, coral growths, anything that might heal, regrow, or sell. The money's stupid. Enough to fund my own rig, keep a team on call, replace my gear after every job. They say it's for medicine, for research. Maybe that's truth. But mostly it's because the ocean's the last place left where you can still find things no one's seen before. I have more stories on that in a bit. I don't talk much outside the water. Don't need to. Diving gives you a kind of quiet that doesn't exist anywhere else. You start to crave it. You start measuring life in PSI, in air consumption, in how steady your line hand feels when visibility drops to 0. Up top, I don't sleep much. I watch dive footage instead. People ask me why I do it. Why I keep going deeper when I've already proven myself a dozen times over. I tell them it's because every cave has a voice. It doesn't speak, just waits. You drop in, and for a while, you're the only thing alive that knows it exists. That's enough reason for me. I work with 2 people, always the same 2. That's not usual in this business. Most divers come and go. Some burn out. Others panic on a deep run and don't come back. But we have stuck together for 4 years now. Trust matters more than skill when you're 400 feet down and 2 turns from the exit. Marcus is the oldest of us. Ex-Navy, quiet voice, always steady. Never raises his tone, not even when things go sideways. You could be 10 seconds from blackout, and he'd still talk to you like you're ordering lunch. That's why I keep him close. He watches everything. Depth, timing, gear, the line tension, even the expressions we make before a dive. He's the kind of guy who never uses 5 words when 3 will do. He doesn't talk about what he did in the Navy. My guess is deep sea recovery or something classified. The way he handles a rebreather or checks over the bailout gear tells me he's been in tighter spots than most of us can imagine. I have seen him spot a faulty valve by ear. He never boasts. Doesn't need to. We call him the anchor when we're joking around. Even Laura picked up on it, and she hasn't even known him long. Laura's the biologist. She's in her 20s. Smart, curious, way too young to be diving caves like these. But she learns fast and she doesn't scare easy. She isn't a professional diver, not by training, but she got certified quick after joining us. She's the only one who can identify the stuff we find. Microbes, eggs, tissue samples. She knows what's valuable and what's just wet rock. She's good at keeping things light. Makes bad jokes before we drop. Sometimes they're funny. Most times they just make the silence seem smaller. She asks a lot of questions. Always writing things down. Always thinking a few steps ahead. I don't know if she wants to discover something or prove herself. Could be both. The job is simple, on paper. We're hired by private marine biotech companies. They fund the expeditions and keep everything off the record. No federal involvement, no permits. They're after one thing: biological samples. The rarer the better, especially anything that can't be traced back to the surface. There's a compound they care about more than anything else. It's called enzyme 42. It helps tissue heal faster than anything they've ever seen. Lab-grown skin closes in seconds. Nerve cells regrow. Muscle repairs itself without scar tissue. They found it once in an egg. A single egg pulled out of a collapsed trench back in the 90s. The diver who brought it up didn't survive the return trip. Nobody ever found his body. They think the egg belonged to a species they call sea emperors. Nothing official. No photos, no confirmed samples since then. Just theories and sonar records that don't add up. But if the enzyme came from a real creature, It is worth more than anything else on the planet. And that's why we're here. The Devil's Throat is a submerged cave system off the Florida Panhandle. It starts with a sinkhole in the Gulf, wide enough to drop a small boat into. Locals call it the mouth. From the surface, it looks just like a dark patch in the water, but once you descend, it turns into a maze of limestone tunnels. The pressure down there can crush you if you go too deep, and the current can flip in minutes when the tide changes. It's not on most charts. Officially, it's marked as a geological instability zone. Unstable rock, unpredictable shifts. Divers avoid it. No one logs practice dives there. People who try, well, they don't come back. The sonar scans show moving shapes bigger than submarines. Some say they're just caves shifting. Others think they move on their own. We're the first team to go back in 20 years. The company wants us to go as deep as possible, collect samples, and get out. That's the plan. We started the dive briefing an hour before launch. I always run it myself. Doesn't matter how many times we've done this kind of job, you go over the plan. Out loud. You look each person in the eye, and you don't assume they remember it. You make sure they know it. Repetition matters. You don't think clearly under pressure unless the plan's already muscle memory. I laid out the gear on the bench in front of us. 3 full sets, 1 for each diver. 5 oxygen tanks per person, each one topped off and triple checked for pressure and seal. Every tank was labeled with color-coded tape, marked for depth and order of use. We don't use standard open circuit scuba. Our suits run closed circuit rebreathers. That means we recycle exhaled gas, extend bottom line, and keep bubbles to a minimum. But rebreathers can fail, so each tank is a backup. We also set emergency tanks along the route. 1 tank every 100 meters, clipped to the guideline. If something breaks, you fall back, grab a tank, and get out. That's the rule. No freelancing, no hero dives. All right, 3 divers, I said. 5 tanks each, 300 meters of safety line. I paused. Objective is Chamber Delta. Laura looked up at that. She tapped her tablet and brought up the cave map. She zoomed in on the lower half. The Devil's Throat system branches out in 5 main directions from the primary sinkhole: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. 4 of them have been partially mapped, at least to a certain point. Only Delta was left unfinished. Drones had been sent into Delta in 2004. They got in about 100 meters before the footage cut out. Not an equipment failure, just scrambled data. Glitchy, corrupted, like something interfered with the signal. Most people figured it was just the pressure of the mineral content in the rock. But I don't guess when it comes to diving. You go in prepared, or you don't go in at all. I stepped to the map Laura was projecting. I pointed to the route. From entry, we're going 270 meters horizontal, 110 meters vertical. We follow the main tunnel, fork left at marker 7, descend past the ridge. At the second bend, we switch to crawl mode. It's a tight fit past there. If we don't reach the chamber in 90 minutes, we turn back. No exceptions. Laura nodded and tapped the record icon on her tablet. She always logs every briefing: voice notes, GPS tags, personal readings, and environmental data. That's how she handles pressure. She tracks everything. Marcus didn't say anything, but I saw him coiling the line again from scratch. He always does it himself. The guideline is bright yellow, made from a high-strength synthetic. It has directional knots every 5 meters. Pull forward, you feel the knot one way. Pull back, moves the other. That's how you know which way is out, even blind. There's no GPS down there. No signal. Just line and time. I kept going. Objective is a fossilized nest. The lab flagged it in the drone scan. It's a formation in chamber delta that shows a cluster of shell-like structures, organic in shape. Could be mineral, could be actual remains. The lab's interested in one thing, and that is residue. Define residue, Laura said, not looking up. Anything sticky, crusted, or embedded in the wall, I replied. They're looking for biomaterial, especially if it shows signs of growth. She raised her eyebrows slightly. So we're hoping for a trail. Not a trail, I began. A sample of enzyme 42. That changed the room. Even Marcus paused. Enzyme 42, it's not just a lab compound. It's the reason any of us were even on this job. The last confirmed sample came from an egg pulled out of a collapsed trench near the Cayman Rise back in '97. The diver brought it to the surface, but didn't survive the trip back. The egg cracked during decompression. What leaked out of it was like anything else ever recorded. Cells soaked in the enzyme regenerated. Fast. Too fast. Skin closed over itself. Nerve tissue reconnected. The labs couldn't reproduce it synthetically. Every test since has failed. The company we were diving for owned the rights to that original sample. They'd spent 20 years sending drones and divers into caves like this, trying to find more. Most came back with nothing. A few never came back at all. We'd trained for 3 months. Dry runs, deep dives in flooded quarries, night sessions, emergency drills. We knew the layout, we knew the markers. We knew the signs of nitrogen narcosis and rebreather failure. We knew what we were walking into. And like I said before, the money was good. They don't offer numbers like that for coral or sponge samples. It was the kind of pay that solves problems, that ends loans, that puts your name on a lab or your kid in a better school. Laura played it like she was chasing discovery, but I'd seen her contract. I knew what she was getting. Marcus didn't say anything about the pay, but he showed up to every prep session early and never asked questions. And that told me enough. I started checking the dive packs, starting with Laura's. Regulators, valves, pressure gauge, weight balance. Everything passed. Marcus checked mine while I worked. That's how we do it. Cross-checks. One diver checks, the other verifies. You don't leave it to chance. And that's when the sonar chirped. Not a sharp alarm, just a long, low ping. All three of us turned toward the monitor. The screen showed a slow, wide return. One thick shape, just for a second. Then gone. Not an error beep. Wasn't glitchy or broken. It looked like something had passed through the scan grid just outside the sinkhole. Laura squinted at the display. That's not a fault, she said. Marcus stepped in. Run it again. She did. The pulse came back. Once. Then again. Then it stopped. We stared at the screen for almost a minute. No movement. No follow-up. Just the same strange pattern. A return big enough to register, but without enough form to classify. Nobody said what they were thinking. We just went back to the gear. We dropped past the final depth marker at 400 feet. And from that point on, everything changed. The sound of our own movement became softer, slower. The water around us didn't move the same way. It was thicker down here. The lights from our helmets didn't travel far anymore. Even with full beams on, we could only see a few meters ahead. Everything beyond that was just dark. The tunnel kept narrowing. At first, I thought we'd hit a pinch point, but the shape of the walls was too smooth. No rough stone, no debris. The walls didn't look like they'd been worn down by water or time. They were curved inward, almost symmetrical. The surface reflected some of the light back in a soft, muted way, like polished glass or smooth bone. It didn't feel natural. Marcus was in front, unspooling the guideline slowly and locking it into the rock every 10 meters. He didn't speak, just kept the pace steady. I followed its center. Laura was behind me, keeping one hand on the line and one on her tablet. Her light scanned side to side, while the tablet ran a scan of the mineral content. She was quiet too. The dive suits handled the pressure, but I could still feel the difference. It was subtle, like gravity had increased just a little. Every movement took more effort. Every breath had to be measured. This was the kind of depth where mistakes became final. Then the sonar pinged. A slow, clear tone from my wrist unit. I stopped and checked the screen. It flickered once, then again. A shape appeared. Not a reading error. A real form moving far below us. Long, wide, low to the floor of a deeper chamber. It drifted slowly across the screen, then disappeared. I didn't say anything. Neither did Marcus. Laura kept recording. Maybe she didn't see the screen, or maybe she chose not to mention it. We kept moving. The tunnel led to a wide drop-off. It opened suddenly, like stepping to the edge of a cliff. Below us, the cave floor stretched out into a massive basin, flat and wide. Our lights barely reached the far edges. The space was enormous, bigger than anything we'd seen on the maps. It was shaped like a stadium. Laura moved closer to me. She pointed her light down, and that's when we saw them. Shells. Huge, spiraled shells embedded in the cave floor. Dozens. Some stood upright like statues. Others rested on their sides or at angles, partially buried in sediment. They looked like ammonites, those ancient marine creatures, but at a scale that didn't make sense. Marcus broke the silence through comms. Fossils. Ancient. Laura drifted lower, scanning the nearest one. She circled it slowly. No, she began. They're molted. I moved closer and looked again. She was right. These weren't solid fossil shells. They were hollow. The center of each spiral was empty, as if something had pushed its way out from inside. The edges were curled and soft-looking, not stone, something more flexible. They looked like shed skins. None of us moved for a while. I stared at him, and something clicked in my memory, something from the pre-dive briefing. We'd been flown to a secure facility a few days before the mission. The company wanted us to understand what we were being sent after. They didn't give us instructions, just information. There were 4 scientists, 3 men, 1 woman. They spoke slowly, like they were trying not to overstate anything. Each word felt carefully chosen. Nobody checked their watches. Nobody looked bored. They showed us images, Cave art pulled from deep underwater chambers in the Caribbean. The drawings were faded, but still clear enough to see the shapes. Long, serpent-like figures, some with dozens of eyes, others with gaping, open bodies. The lines wrapped around small human figures, dragging them inward. Then they showed us drone footage. It was short, only 20 seconds, but it showed a trail of fluid running along a cave wall, glowing faint blue under a special light. Enzyme 42. They told us every sample they'd recovered came from dead sources. Empty shells, dried fluid trails, pieces of membrane caught in filters. Never from a living specimen. The woman on the panel had said it clearly. We've never captured one, never observed one in real time. We only know it exists by what it leaves behind. One of the men added, and the teams that went deepest never came back. Now inside this chamber, Laura hovered just above one of the shells. She scanned it with a tablet, then tagged its location.
This isn't fossilized,
she began.
It's recent.
Marcus leaned in.
How recent? I don't know,
she began.
But this isn't rock. It's protein. Organic. The shell's hollow. Look.
She reached out with one gloved hand and brushed the surface. A thin layer peeled back, curling away like skin. It floated upward, delicate and light. The rest of the shell didn't move. But now I could see what it really was. Not a fossil, not a rock. It was something that had lived here. Something that had grown, then left. And we were right inside the place that it had left behind. The tunnel curved wide after the molded shells. We moved slowly, careful not to kick up the sediment along the floor. The rock gave way to open space. It was larger than we expected. Much larger. The chamber ahead wasn't marked on any map. It looked like a dome, perfectly rounded, with a smooth ceiling and an uneven floor. I could see debris scattered across the bottom. Not stone, not coral. Looked almost man-made. I dropped lower, shining my light across the ground. Tanks. Diving tanks. Some rusted through, others still intact. A few were half buried in the sediment, but most looked like they'd been dropped in a rush. Then I saw the helmets. Some were cracked, others were still whole, lying open like they'd been taken off. One had a name label barely visible through a layer of grime. I didn't recognize it. Then we saw the bodies. Not skeletons. These were something else. Some were just bone, fused into the limestone like fossils, arms stretched out, legs bent, but others still had shape. Not alive, not fresh, just preserved. Flesh that hadn't rotted, suits that hadn't torn. One diver looked like he was reaching forward, his gloved hand outstretched toward a wall crack. The wall had grown around his fingers, sealing him in. Laura hovered beside me. Her voice came through the comms. They didn't die fast. Marcus said nothing. He scanned the walls. Laura moved closer to a fissure. A clear fluid leaked from a hairline crack in the stone. It dripped slow, steady, forming a small pool at the base. She pulled out a vial and caught a sample. When she passed her light over the fluid, it reacted. It pulsed just once, like it knew it was being seen. Laura spoke through the comms again. It's active, cell movement, maybe heat reactive. Marcus floated beside her, eyeing the vial. Looks like the mucus they have back at the lab. He was right. The samples we'd trained with were always diluted, stabilized. This was raw and unfiltered. Laura sealed the vial and marked it. I watched her hands. She wasn't shaking, but she was working faster now. And that's when the current shifted. It didn't rush or pull right away. It was subtle at first, a slow reversal of direction. Our line began to sway. Particles drifted sideways instead of falling straight down. And then we heard it. A deep groan. Not metal, not rock. It came through the stone itself, long and hollow, like a whale song, slowed down until it barely registered as a tone. We froze. The sound didn't repeat, but something moved above us. Not a ripple, not a swirl. A shape. Long, smooth, moving slow. I pointed my light upward. The beam caught it for half a second. It was massive. Longer than any creature I'd ever seen. Bigger than a whale. Its skin was translucent, stretched thin like jellyfish membrane, with streaks of blue light running under the surface. The light shifted with its movement, almost like veins. And the eyes, not 2, not 4, a dozen at least, each one set in a different direction. Some looked down, others tracked us. They didn't blink. They just followed. The mouth didn't open. It unfolded. Slits peeled back from the center, revealing rows of short, spiraled limbs, almost like tongues or fingers. They moved on their own, twitching, adjusting, searching. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't aim. He just reacted. The flare gun fired. The chamber filled with white light, and for a second we saw everything. The creature, the size of the dome, the scattered gear, the old bodies. And then the light vanished behind a rising cloud of silt. The flare had hit something, but I couldn't see what. And then the current snapped. It pulled from below. A whirlpool formed near the fissure where Laura had taken the sample. She screamed. Her body dropped fast, yanked downward. Her tether line stretched, then snapped. The scream cut off. I dropped toward the current, but I was too far. I couldn't see her. I only saw the splash of red that followed. It didn't rise quickly. It spread out slow, like smoke in zero gravity. Marcus didn't hesitate. He dove after her. No words, no plan, he just went. I looked down. I waited for a moment. Nothing came back. No movement, no signal. Then the sonar failed. Everything went quiet again, and I was alone. I don't remember surfacing. The last clear thought I had was turning away from the dome chamber. I checked the line and started moving. Every part of me knew to leave, but I don't remember choosing it. I guess I just moved. I followed the guideline like it was the only thing left. It didn't feel like the same line we'd come in on. It felt longer. The turns felt wrong. My hands were slow on the knots. My legs kicked, but my body didn't respond the same way. The pressure had caught up with me. My thoughts felt disconnected, like I was drifting above them. I kept moving forward, but my vision blurred at the edges. My arms shook. One of my eardrums ruptured during the ascent. Left side. Didn't hurt at first. The pain came later, once the cold hit me. I remember trying to check my depth, but I couldn't make out the numbers. My eyes kept fogging up behind the mask. My rebreather began to fail just below the mouth of the sinkhole. The regulator choked once, then gave out. I reached back, unclipped the bailout tank, and made the switch. That part is muscle memory. I know I did it, but I don't remember how fast. From there, I kicked upward. I think I blacked out. Maybe at 60 feet, maybe higher. They told me the rescue boat found me, floating face up near the buoy line. The dive team pulled me on board, and I was half conscious. They said I was still clutching the camera in both hands, pressed tight against my cheek, like it was part of me. I was bleeding from my left ear. My lips were dry and cracked from exposure. There was a tear in my suit along the shoulder seam. The medics said I had a mild case of decompression sickness. They were surprised it wasn't worse. They got me under heat packs and fluids. I remember the deck being cold under my back. I remember the motion of the boat more than the people on it. I couldn't focus on faces. But I was awake when they took the camera. The body camera I wore through the dive had recorded everything. It was heat sealed into the rig and ran on a closed circuit with local backup. Even if it lost signal, it kept recording. The video was mostly useless. The footage was full of silt, low light, and movement blur. The lens was cracked at some point during the descent. Every shift in water pressure distorted the picture. But the audio was clean. In the recovery tent the next morning, they played it back in a loop. A few members of the lab team were there. A couple of the dive coordinators stood off to the side. No one spoke for the first few minutes. Laura's voice came through first. Calm, collected. She was describing shell measurements, maybe trying to log a sample ID. She was surprised, then worried. Then she screamed. The scream was short. Then Marcus's voice, loud but not panicked. He shouted her name once. Then the sound. That same deep hum. It rolled through the speakers like a long underwater breath, slow and wide, like something the size of a building groaning through the stone. It didn't rise or fall. It just moved. Then nothing. No more voices, no impacts, no collapse, no alarms. Just silence. I told them I never found the others. I told them there was no trace, no lights, no movement, no bubbles. I stayed long enough to look, but there was nothing left to follow. They didn't press me. They believed what I said. They didn't ask for details. The company classified the mission under equipment failure. They filed the final report as an accident, environmental instability, site risk, line malfunction. The dive was marked as terminated due to safety loss. No negligence, no foul play. Nobody blamed me. The lab team ran the audio through a review panel. I wasn't invited to those meetings. I read the summary report later, though. The official term they used was indeterminate biological presence. That was all they said about it. They didn't mention the creature, not once. They didn't ask if I'd seen anything. They paid me in full. No bonus for samples, no deduction for failure. Just the standard payout. 2 days later, they sent me a non-disclosure agreement. 10 pages, legal language. I knew what it meant. No public interviews, no papers, no outside communication with universities or media. I signed it, and I moved inward. I didn't want to be near the ocean. I found a small place in the hills. Nothing fancy, no shoreline, no space. I don't dive anymore. I haven't gone near a rebreather or dry suit since that mission. I still have the gear. It's in a locked case I haven't opened in years. The tablet Laura used came back in the same supply crate as my rig, and I kept it. The data logs are encrypted behind a passcode. I've never tried to crack it. I keep telling myself it wouldn't matter. But I still think about what's on it. I think about her voice in the last few seconds of the audio. Calm, then afraid, then gone. Most nights I sleep fine, but when I do dream, I know what I see. It's always the same. A blue glow rising through black water. And that sound. Years have passed since the dive. These days I speak in documentaries, the kind with slow music and wide shots of coral reefs. People ask me about deep sea ecosystems, underwater pressure zones, and rare marine compounds. I give simple answers, clean ones. I talk about regeneration, biodiversity, and bioluminescent organisms. I never mentioned what really happened. The official story is already out there. Equipment failure, compromised line, poor visibility, unstable conditions, 2 divers lost, 1 survivor. Case closed. But when the cameras turn off and the interviews end, I stay behind. I still dive. Not in caves, not anymore. Now I charter submersibles. I fund the trips myself when I have to. Other times I convince labs or universities to lend me equipment. I tell them it's for research. I use old data from the Devil's Throat to write papers about sonar behavior and deep ocean drift patterns. Most of it's true, and the rest is close enough. The real reason I'm out there is simple. I'm hunting. Not with weapons, not even with nets. I just want to see him again. Sea emperors. Since my dive, the number of deep sea sightings has gone up. Not by much. Just a few blips on sonar here and there. But they're consistent. Always deep trenches. Always at night. Always the same report. Something massive and glowing. Most are dismissed. The Navy calls them sonar ghost, false echoes, geological shifts. They're wrong. I've built a private log. I call it monster patterns. It's not public. Nobody else sees it. Each entry has a time, a location, a depth, and a description. They're not random. They move with the seasons. I started noticing it in the second year. The sightings match the lunar cycle, like how crops follow a cycle of harvest. New moon, first quarter, full. It's not about tides. Something beneath the surface is following a pattern. And that pattern is changing. They're moving closer to shore. The first entries were all deep trench zones. Mid-Atlantic Ridge, Puerto Rico Trench. Places that go down 6 miles or more. But now, the latest reports come from the continental shelf. Shallower waters. Fishermen reporting strange lights under their boat. Oil rigs recording structural vibrations they can't explain. I try not to jump to conclusions, but I know what I saw. I remember the eyes tracking me in that chamber with a sense of awareness, like it'd seen 1,000 of me before, and would see 1,000 more. Laura and Marcus are still gone. Their bodies never came back. No signals, no remains, nothing. I still think about what happened in that last second. What they saw, what they felt. Whether it was over quickly. I never talk about them on camera. If someone asks, I change the subject. They deserve more than to be mentioned in passing. I've spoken to a few scientists who continue to study the sea emperors in secret. Some believe that they're part of a forgotten branch of evolution, animals that adapted to pressure and darkness in ways we can't understand. Others think they're still myths, overactive sonar, old diver stories recycled over beers. I try not to argue with them. I just say one thing. The ocean's not empty. It never was. And we only saw one of them. You ever wake up to the sound of birds chirping, sun peeking through the tent flap, and your first thought is, dang, that bear was loud last night? Well, that's a normal Tuesday for me. Name's Ryan. I'm a 27-year-old park ranger, and I live about as close to the edge of the wilderness as you can get without needing a permit. Think national park/reserve, mountains all around, dirt roads, pine trees tall enough to hide a cell tower, and the air so clean it almost tastes sweet. I've got a one-room log cabin, no TV, no internet, just me, my gear, and a view that makes all those tech bros cry on their treadmills. I guess you could say I'm an adventure junkie. Always have been. Camping with bears, done it. Sleeping under a thunderstorm in a hammock. Twice. Ate nothing but beef jerky for breakfast 5 days straight once just because I could. The local store guy thinks I'm nuts, but he still stocks the teriyaki kind I like. I live out here because, honestly, it's where I belong. The quiet, the trees, the rush of wind down a ravine. It all makes sense to me in a way cities never could. Growing up, we didn't have much. My folks were good people, hardworking, kind. The kind who packed you a sandwich, even if they were skipping lunch themselves. But money, well, that was always tight. Vacations meant a beat-up tent, a bag of dollar store marshmallows, and the same pair of jeans all week. I didn't care. Those were the best days of my life. I remember the crackle of the campfire, Mom grilling whatever Dad pulled out of the lake that morning. Bluegill, usually. Dad said they were ugly fish, but tasty as heck. We'd all sit on upturned logs, roasting marshmallows so cheap they stuck to your fingers worse than gum. The stars above seemed like they were putting on a show just for us. But my favorite part, caving. My dad had this thing for exploring the old mines scattered around the hills. Some were sealed off, but others, well, let's just say we didn't ask permission. He'd bring a couple flashlights, a cheap plastic helmet for me, and we would spend hours down in those tunnels. It was cool and damp, the air always smelling like wet stone and rust. I felt like Indiana Jones, minus the whip and, the giant boulders. Just a scrawny kid with dirt on his face and his old man showing him the ropes. Those summers, they shaped me. I didn't have, new Converse like the other kids at school. My backpack was duct taped and my lunch was wrapped in tin foil. No fancy boxes. But I had stories. Real ones. And when I grew up, well, I never really let go of that. College was a detour. Got a degree in environmental science because, hey, turns out loving the woods can be useful. Most of my classmates wanted to work for conservation groups or wear ties and argue about wetlands in a boardroom. Me, I just wanted to get back out here. And I did. Now, officially, I'm a park ranger. But I'm not the type who hands out trail maps or stands around sipping coffee by the station porch. I'm what they call a caver. That's right. I take people, mostly kids, into the caves near the park trails. We explore the tunnels. I teach them about bats and rock formations. I spook them with scary stories. And we all run like heck when we actually see a bat. At the end of the day, they all get a shiny badge that says Junior Caver or something like that. Their parents take pictures. The kids feel like explorers. And I get to pretend like I'm 10 years old again. It's a good gig. Honest work. Been doing it 5 summers now, and I know these caves like the back of my hand. Of course, it's not always fun and games. Some summers have been weirder than others. I've seen things down there that I don't talk about often. Strange things. Things that don't fit into my ranger manual or any biology textbook. But I'll get to those. My name is Ryan, and I'm a cave explorer. These are my stories. Now, cave exploring has always been strange. Heck, anything that has to do with the woods or dark, tight places is strange if you think about it. There's just something ancient about being in a cave. When you're down there, away from sunlight, no phone signal, no road noise, surrounded by rock on all sides. It does something to your brain. It's not like a haunted house or a horror movie. This is a different kind of fear. Older. Like something deep in you remembers being afraid of places just like that. Some people can't handle it. They panic, start breathing fast, sweating. One kid threw up in his helmet once. It's not even the tight spaces that get him. It's the stillness, the silence. You feel like you've been dropped off the face of the earth. Me. Well, I love it. Always have. I guess I'm one of the weird ones. I like the quiet. I like the cold air and the crunch of gravel under my boots. I like how your voice bounces off the walls in funny ways. I even like the smell. Kind of earthy, kind of damp. Reminds me of being a kid. When Dad and I would go crawling through the old mine shafts in the hills. Just me, him, and a cheap flashlight from the gas station. But even I have to admit, there are times when it gets too quiet, when the silence feels heavy, and sometimes when you're real deep inside the mountain, it feels like you're not alone. I've been leading these cave tours for a while now, 5 summers and counting. I've taken groups of kids into all kinds of caverns. Most are shallow, wide, easy to move around in. We keep it safe, we keep it light. Tell ghost stories, talk about stalactites, get them their little explorer badge like I said, and it's good fun. But not every summer is the same. Some summers are off. The first time I saw something I couldn't explain, it was back in 2009. I remember the year because it was hot as hell that season, and the caves were the only place that felt cold. I had a group of 10 kids, maybe 12, a mix of middle schoolers, mostly city kids. They got loud when they got nervous, which was fine by me, better than crying. We were in this cave I'd explored 100 times. It had a little natural stone bridge about halfway through. Kind of a neat feature. Nothing dramatic, just a bump in the trail. We were almost across it when it gave out. I don't know if it was the heat, or the weight of the group, or maybe time just wore it down. But that section of the rock just snapped, and down we went. Not far, thankfully, maybe 6 or 7 feet. But one of the girls landed wrong. A couple of rocks slid down with us, and one of them pinned her leg. She screamed loud. Everyone else screamed too, which didn't help. My partner Josh was already on the radio before I even got to her. I kept her talking, kept her breathing slow. Asked her about her dog, her favorite TV show, stuff like that. She calmed down fast too. Tough kid. Help showed up fast. The whole team was trained for stuff like this. They had her out in under an hour. Her leg wasn't even broken, just bruised up bad. But while we waited, we were stuck down there, just me and her. The others moved out for safety. And it was then that I felt something. You ever feel like you're being watched? I know, it's a stupid thing to say. Everybody asks that. But that's what it felt like. Not just a feeling. I knew something was watching us. From the dark tunnel ahead, past where the light reached. And then I saw him. 2 small red points of light. Round. Unmoving. Just hanging there in the dark like a pair of coals. I didn't say anything. Not to the girl. She didn't see it. And I made sure she didn't look that way. I told the team to speed up, told them I didn't like it down here. They must have thought I was just spooked from the fall. As soon as the girl was up and out, and they cleared the area, I told them I needed to double check something. And I went back in, alone. Now I know what you're thinking. That was dumb. But I wasn't thinking straight. I thought maybe it was a raccoon or an owl, or worse, some stupid teenager with a flashlight trying to mess with me. We get pranksters like that every now and then. So I went back down in the tunnel, past where the bridge had been, past where we landed. And I kept going. The cave narrowed quick. I had to duck, then crouch, then finally get down on my belly and crawl. Eventually, the tunnel opened up again. There was a wide space, round and low, with a little slope of rubble in the back. In the far corner, hunched over something furry, was a thing. I don't even know what to call it. It was pale, like it hadn't seen the sun in 100 years. Real skinny, but strong looking. The legs bent wrong. Its back was arched, like it'd been crawling for too long. Its head moved in little jerks, kind of like a bird. It was chewing on a dead skunk. I watched it tear off a piece with these sharp little teeth, and I felt something in me scream to get out. But I didn't move. Not until it lifted its head and looked toward me. I didn't wait for anything more. I backed out the way I came, fast. When I got to the bridge, or what was left of it, I took out my knife and cut the ropes I'd used to brace the edge. Let the whole thing fall in. When I got back to the station, I told the team animals had gotten into that section. Said it wasn't safe anymore. Too unstable. Too risky. We marked it off on the map and told future groups to steer clear. I never mentioned what I really saw, and I never went back. You know, my mom used to say something when I was little, back when Dad and I would go crawling through the mines on the weekends. She'd stand by the porch with her arms crossed, shaking her head like she knew something we didn't. She'd say, "You think you're all alone in there? Think again." Back then, I thought you just meant bears. Maybe bats. Now I am not so sure. There are strange things that live in these caves. Now all rangers see things. Maybe not right away, but give it time. Especially us cavers. We spend more hours underground than above it some weeks. And the things we come across, they don't always make sense. Every one of us has a story we keep off the books. Stuff that doesn't make it into the welcome packet or the park website. Some of it's harmless, weird, but harmless. Some of it sticks with you. The next one I've got is about cave water. Simple stuff, really. But I've learned a long time ago, nothing in these caves is ever just what it seems. When I was a trainee, most of my time was spent hauling gear, holding flashlights, and trying not to screw anything up. That's the real start of it. If you want to know how someone becomes a proper caver, it's not glamorous. You don't show up with a headlamp and a vest and suddenly get handed a badge and a whistle. You put in hours, weeks, following the older guys around like a shadow, learning what to touch and what not to. What clay looks like when it's ready to collapse. How to read airflow off a dead end. And then there's the scientific work. That's the part most people outside the field don't think about. People hear caver and picture some crazy guy with ropes and a machete. But real caving, our kind, it's controlled, precise. We map, we log formations, we take samples. Some folks do biology work, others focus on water movement, structural stability, minerals, bat populations, that sort of thing. If you're in the field full time, odds are you've got a degree, maybe two. It's not all glory and dirt. Back then, the head of our training team was this guy named Jackson. Big guy, loud, always talking like he was on camera. He wore too much Axe body spray, to the point where it clung to the insides of the damn helmets. I think he thought it made him cool. I was a few years younger, fresh out of school and eager to prove myself, so I kept my mouth shut about it. At the time, I assumed everyone around me was experienced. You know how it is when you're new. You figure anyone with gear and a clipboard must know what they're doing. Only took me a few hours to realize I'd been very wrong. We went out to a cave called Split Jaw. Locals named it that because of the jagged entrance. It's not a tourist site, more of a study location. Remote, unlit, the kind of place where GPS stops working halfway through the hike in. Our objective was simple. Track moisture deposits along a fault line that ran down the center of the second chamber. Seemed easy enough. We got inside fine. Helmets on, pack secured. First mile or so was the usual. Tight passage, small pools, chalk markings from past teams. But then we hit the chute. It was about 40 feet down, angled just steep enough to make you second guess yourself. The whole thing was caked in thick, wet clay, like someone had taken a hose to a water slide. Going down was easy. You just sat and let gravity take care of it. But I remember looking back up once I was at the bottom and thinking, how the hell are we getting out of here? No ropes, no spikes, nothing to grab onto. Should we rig something? I asked. Jackson just grinned. We'll figure it out when we get there. That was the first time my gut twisted a little. Later on, we came to the river. It cut straight through the chamber like someone had dropped a saw blade through the rock. The walls on either side were about 8 feet high, smooth, with barely any holes. The water itself wasn't that wide, maybe 10, 12 feet across. But it was moving fast, waist deep and cold as hell. Jackson stood at the edge, peering down into the water like he was trying to guess its mood. "You think it's deep?" I asked. He smirked. "Only one way to find out." I gave him a look. It's not really science," I said. "Sure it is. Field testing," he said, tightening the straps on his pack. "You, bringing a rope this time, or?" Jackson grinned. "Where's the fun in ropes?" I rolled my eyes. "Okay, seriously, man. The current's moving. We screw this up. We're not climbing out of here." He stepped in without answering. Jackson was the first in. I went next. The current hit me like a truck. I nearly lost my footing twice before I got to the other side. Climbing the opposite wall took everything I had. I scraped my forearms raw, trying to pull myself up on wet rock, cursing under my breath the whole time. But what happened next made all that feel like nothing. Jackson was about halfway across when he stopped moving. Just stopped, like he'd hit something under the surface. Then he lurched forward and went under. Not slept. Pulled. Everyone panicked. One guy dropped his pack, another jumped in. Took 3 of us to drag Jackson back up. The water fought us the whole way, like it didn't want to let him go. When we got him up, he was screaming so loud I couldn't think. Just this raw, horrible sound. His leg was torn up, deep red gashes down his calf and thigh, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was his foot. The toes were gone. Gone, like something had bitten straight through the boot and the flesh underneath. Clean. There was no blood in the water when he went under. No warning. No flash of anything moving. Just him. And then pain. We wrapped his leg in a shirt and used spare rope as a tourniquet. It wasn't clean, but it was enough to get him moving. We abandoned the mission, obviously, left some gear behind, carried Jackson out inch by inch. When we got to the chute again, it was exactly as bad as I'd imagined. The clay turned every step into a fight. I clawed my way up with my nails, digging into dirt and slick rock, pulling myself one miserable foot at a time. At the top, I looked down and realized just how stupid we'd been. We filed an incident report when we got back. Standard procedure. I put in everything I saw. The pull, the wounds, the bite. I left out the part where I was afraid to go near water for weeks after. I figured that wasn't helpful. Jackson quit the next week, right after getting out of the hospital. Never came back to the station, never answered my text. I think part of him wanted to pretend it never happened. But I remember. I remember the sound of him screaming, the look on his face when he saw his foot, the strange silence from the rest of the team after we made it topside. Because here's the thing. Piranhas don't live in caves. And no rock in that water was sharp enough to bite a man's toes clean off. I still think about that river. About what could have been under there. We didn't go back. Nobody wanted to. Official word was hazardous conditions, but that's just paperwork. The truth is, something was in that water. Something strong, something fast, and something quiet. Jackson was lucky in a way. He made it out, and now he works in a fancy boardroom far away from this place. And if you ask around the ranger station, the ones who've been here long enough, you'll notice none of us go back there. I was about half a mile in, working on bat collection, when the call came through. The job that day was simple. Monitor a cluster of roosting bats near an old drip line. I had my sample kit out, one glove on, fiddling with a set of tubes that didn't want to seal right. I was already annoyed, and my radio crackled right when I finally got the thing to sit straight.
Ryan, come in. We've got a situation.
It was Linda, a fellow ranger who usually got stuck filing reports by the station. I clicked the receiver. Go ahead.
Girl's missing. Summer group. Name's Lacey. Yellow shirt.
She said. I paused, squinting through the low light. Yellow shirt?
Should be obvious. Last visual had her headed your direction, copy.
She said. Copy. I'll start the sweep. I packed up the gear in a rush. Now, finding kids isn't like tracking adults. You don't look for footprints or call out names over and over like in the movies. Kids go where they feel small, where they can hide. You've got to think like one. I start small and move out. Always. It's counterintuitive. Most people think you search the big caverns first. Open areas, louder echo, easier to move through. But I've found that kids don't like big empty places. They like crawl spaces. Spaces they can wedge into, curl up, feel surrounded, comforted. It's how their brains work when they're scared. So I check the tighter offshoots first. Cracks along the wall, dead-end tunnels, anything low and narrow. Called a name once or twice, quiet-like. Didn't want to spook her. Or anything else. After about 20 minutes, I heard the faint trickle of water. That was enough to narrow it down. On this side of the trail, there's a small shaft not far from the slow drip tunnel. Not mapped anymore. Barely wide enough to squeeze through if you've had a big breakfast. I got on my hands and knees and shined my light into it. There she was. Lacey. Yellow shirt. Curled up with her knees pulled to her chest, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Wide-eyed but calm. Not crying, not shaking. Just quiet. Lacey, hey, you mind coming out here with me? I said, keeping my voice steady. She nodded and held up her arms like she already knew I'd carry her. I held on to her and crawled out backward. It took a few extra breaths to get upright again, but we were out in no time. She held onto my shoulder like a backpack strap the whole way back. Didn't say much. Later, after she'd had some water and the other kids had stopped crowding her, I sat with her by the gear bench. You okay? She nodded. I wasn't scared. Well, you did great. Real smart staying put. Makes it easier for us to find you. She looked at me, then glanced down at her shoes. You weren't the first to find me. I blinked. What do you mean? There was a man before you got here. I sat up straighter. A man? She nodded. He had a big coat and a hard hat and a long beard. He said you'd come to get me. I stared at her for a long second. You're sure? She looked me dead in the eyes. He said his name was Henry. Now, there hasn't been a mining team in these mountains since the 70s. Before the park got its official status, this whole range was a network of old claims and tunnels, most of them long since sealed or collapsed. I helped seal some of them myself. No access, no light, no reason for anyone to be down there. When I got back to the station that night, I went straight to my supervisor's office. His name's Mitch. Old-timer. Been here longer than the paint on the walls. I asked him if he knew anything about a miner named Henry. He didn't even blink. You saw Henry? I paused. No, one of the kids did. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Yeah, that sounds like him. Who is he? I asked. Mitch looked toward the window, like he needed to picture it. Back when they were still digging for gold out here, there was a collapse. About 9 men got buried in the shaft near Saddle Ridge. Only 4 made it out. One of them was Henry. Henry something. Nobody remembers his last name, just that he was the foreman. Real serious guy. Carried a pickaxe everywhere, even above ground. Story goes, he died trying to dig out the others. Refused to leave until he got everyone out. Didn't make it. Mitch explained. I sat there trying to process it. So you're telling me a ghost helped this kid? Mitch gave a small shrug. Well, he's not the kind that scares folk. He's quiet. Stays out of sight unless he's got a reason. But yes, some of the rangers believe in him, especially the older ones. We've had stories like this before. How many? I asked. Mitch leaned forward. Well, every couple years, lost kid, found safe, usually by water. They always say the same thing. Hard hat, big beard, didn't talk much. I didn't know what to say. Years passed after that. Lacey's group came and went. But it wasn't the last time something like that happened. 8 times out of 10, when a kid goes missing on that side of the range, I find them by water. Same exact spot I found her. Sometimes it takes an hour, sometimes a few. But they're always okay. A little shaken, but fine. And they always mention the man in the hard hat. So now, when kids get lost and we're out searching, I tell the rookies not to worry too much if we're in Henry's territory. I tell them to keep calm, stick to the paths, look for the stream. And when I find the kid, I ask them what happened. Most of the time, they say, a man helped me. And I know who they mean. Sometimes I leave coffee and a piece of bread by the old collapsed shaft near Saddle Ridge. Nothing big, just a thanks. I don't know if it matters. I don't expect anything in return, but it feels right. Over the years, I have seen some strange things in these caves. Good things, terrible things. Things that'll make you think twice before cracking a joke about ghosts. Things that make you double-check your flashlight, even when it's fully charged. I've seen a lot in these caves. Some of it helpful, some of it dangerous. Most of it very hard to explain. I've learned that kids don't wander far, but they don't always go where you'd expect. That the smallest spaces are where you look first. The water inside a cave is never just water, and that you always bring rope, even if you think you don't need it. I've learned there are animals that don't show up in any guidebooks. injuries that can't be blamed on rocks, sounds that aren't wind, no matter how much people want them to be. I don't have theories. I'm not that kind of guy. But I pay attention. You work a job like this long enough, and you stop looking for explanations. You just learn how to work around the things that don't make sense. Well, they gave me a promotion last fall. Field lead. Fancy title. Slightly bigger paycheck. Still the same dirt under my nails. The best part, I upgraded from beef jerky to bacon for breakfast. Honest to God, pan-fried bacon. That alone was worth the years I put in. I still keep a pack of jerky in the glove box, out of habit, but it doesn't hit the same now that I have tasted victory. Things have changed a bit since my trainee days. I don't get sent crawling through mudslides unless I volunteer, which, unfortunately for me, I still do more often than I should. But I've got more say in what I take on now. More freedom in the field. I get to run my own research schedule during the off-season, which means no school groups until the summer rolls back around. Just me, the rocks, and the long list of data points the lab wants me to collect. Don't get me wrong, I miss the kids. Nothing beats the look on their faces the first time they step into a cavern and realize how big and quiet the underground world really is. But these winter months, they've been peaceful, quiet. There's a rhythm to field work. Wake up early, gear up, hike out, take your samples, document, get back before dark, repeat. I don't mind the routine. There's always a project going on. Water quality in the limestone runoffs, bat population tracking, mineral shifts, fungal growth studies. Stuff that sounds boring unless you're the one holding the flashlight and seeing it real up close. Sometimes I send the samples back in padded coolers. Sometimes I haul them out on foot. Either way, it keeps me moving. And that's the kind of life I like. And yeah, I still bring Henry his coffee. Not every week, but often enough. Sometimes I leave it just outside the collapsed shaft with a folded napkin and a square of bread. Sometimes it's a paper cup on a warm rock ledge. Nobody touches it. Not even the animals. But the cup is always empty when I come back. The way I see it, Henry is a part of this place, same as the rest of us. Only difference is, he's got more history in his bones. Now, if you ever think about becoming a ranger, especially a cave explorer, you better know what you're signing up for. You'll spend a lot of time cold, wet, sore, and questioning your life choices. You'll get used to eating granola bars at 3 a.m. and waking up with your face half frozen to your sleeve. You'll learn to walk without making noise, to crawl without panic, to know the difference between a rock shift and something else moving in the dark. You'll also see things most people never do. Light filtering through quartz like a lantern, bats swirling overhead in perfect silence, pools so still they look like glass. And yes, sometimes things you can't quite explain. There are strange things that live in these parts. I've said it before and I will say it again. Some things hide in the cracks and the cold and the silence. Strangers still are the people who stick around, the ones who see things and keep coming back, the ones who learn to live alongside the unexplainable and walk the same routes like they're just part of the terrain. Most folks would run or laugh it off or pretend it never happened. We don't. We get up the next day and go back in because that's the job. And if you ask me, it's a job worth doing. There's something about being the person who helps a kid out of a crawl space, who gets a call, drops everything, and ends the day with everyone accounted for, who knows the tunnels well enough to make it back without markers. Yeah, some days are harder than others. Some weeks stretch longer than they should. But when it's all said and done and you walk out of the cave, you get to stand up straight again, peel off your gloves, and look up. And when you do, you get a sky full of real stars. That's the part no one tells you about. Not the weirdness, not the bruises, not even the scary stories. It's the stars. The moment when you come back to the surface, blink a few times, and see the whole damn sky waiting for you. That's what makes it worth it. That and the bacon. But seriously, if you ever do take the job, always bring extra rope. My name is Jack. I'm 24 and I make my living crawling around in the dark. You could call me a caver, but it's not just a job for me. It's an obsession. I guide tourists through winding tunnels and squeeze them through tight spaces they didn't think they could fit into. They pay me to teach them how to conquer their fears, but truth be told, I'm not much braver than anyone else. I've just learned to shove fear into a corner and ignore it. Most of the time, I got into caving by accident. When I was a kid, my family visited a cavern on vacation. It was one of those big tourist attractions with paved paths and handrails, the kind of place they light up with colored bulbs to make it look pretty. I was 10, but even back then, I wanted more, you know? I remember asking the guide where the tunnels went, and he said, "Nowhere you'd want to go, kid." That stuck with me. I decided I did want to go wherever those tunnels led. A few years later, I convinced my dad to take me to a local caving club meeting. Those guys, grizzled old men with beards, calloused hands, and stories about getting stuck for hours in passages no wider than your shoulders. They were my heroes. By the time I was 18, I was spending every weekend underground. I'd crawl into places so tight you couldn't even lift your head. I'd come home with bruises on my ribs and mud in places mud should never be. And I'd call it a good time. My mom thought I was crazy. My dad just said, "Better than sitting in front of a screen all day." Now, caving is my life. I work for a company that runs tours in a massive cave system. I know every twist and turn like the back of my hand. I've memorized the names of every stalactite and every flowstone formation. On weekends, though, I go rogue. No guided tours, no safety rails, just me, my helmet, and my headlamp, looking for the places no one else has been brave or dumb enough to go. There's something about the unknown that pulls me in. A dark, uncharted passage is like a mystery waiting to be solved. I'll crawl through 100 feet of mud just to see what's on the other side. And sometimes, it's nothing more than rock. But other times, it is a cavern so beautiful. Takes your breath away. That's the high I'm always chasing. This weekend, I decided to check out a new area. I'd heard rumors about a cave system in the woods about an hour's drive from town. It wasn't on any maps, and nobody seemed to know much about it. And that was all the invitation I needed. I packed my gear, helmet, ropes, flashlight, extra batteries, snacks, and set out early Saturday morning. The trailhead wasn't marked, but I'd found a vague description of how to get there in an old forum post. Follow the creek until you see a rock shaped like a bear's head, it said. The entrance is just past that. The hike was peaceful at first. The woods were quiet, except for the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional chirp of a bird. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. I found the bear-shaped rock just where the post said it would be. It did look like a bear. in a lopsided sort of way, with moss growing over its ears. Just beyond it, I spotted the entrance. It was a jagged hole in the side of a limestone bluff, half hidden by ferns. The opening was barely wide enough to crawl through. Perfect. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The beam disappeared into a black void. My pulse quickened. This was it, an unexplored cave. Maybe nobody had ever set foot inside. I mean, that's not possible, right? But anyway. I slid into the opening on my stomach, wriggling forward like a snake. The rock scraped against my jacket, but I didn't mind. This was the part I loved. The feeling of being swallowed by the earth, of leaving the world behind. As the light from the entrance faded, I felt that familiar mix of excitement and unease. What lay ahead? I had no idea. Now, the first chamber wasn't much to look at. A low-ceilinged room with rough walls and a floor covered in loose rocks. I crouched and scanned the space with my flashlight. There were 2 passages leading out. One was narrow and sloped upward. The other was wide enough to walk through, but I plunged steeply into the depths. I chose the steep one. As I descended, the air grew cooler and heavier. My breath echoed in the confined space. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I had to duck to avoid scraping my helmet. I kept going, deeper and deeper, and that's when I saw the first sign that something wasn't right. It was a wooden box, just lying there on the cave floor, like someone had left it behind. At first, I thought it was just an old toolbox, or maybe part of some abandoned mining equipment. But when I crouched down to take a closer look, my flashlight caught the sharp edges of nails hammered into the corners. It wasn't a box. It was a coffin. I froze. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation. This had to be a prank, right? Some weird macabre joke left by other cavers to freak out anybody who wandered in here. I laughed nervously, but the sound felt out of place in the stillness. My laughter faded, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the cave. I stood there for a while, trying to decide what to do. Eventually, curiosity won out. I stepped closer and swept my flashlight over it. And that's when I saw them. 3 more coffins, arranged in a neat little row. All identical, all eerily pristine, considering the damp, muddy environment. They were spaced evenly apart, like someone had carefully measured the distance between them. What the hell? I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice making me feel a little less alone. My chest tightened, and a cold knot of unease began to form in my stomach. This couldn't be real. Who would drag coffins down here? And why? I stepped closer to the first one, my boots crunching on the gravelly floor. It was just a plain wooden box, unvarnished. The wood looked old but not rotted, which didn't make sense. In this damp environment, anything organic should have decayed long ago. My hand hovered over the lid, hesitating. Every rational part of me screamed to leave it alone, to turn around and get the hell out of here. But the pull of curiosity was too strong. Slowly, I gripped the edge and lifted. The lid creaked open, and the smell hit me first, a faint, musty odor like dirt. My flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it inside. A child. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. His skin was pale, and his hair was a dusty blonde. He was dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothes, a button-up shirt and suspenders, the kind of thing you'd see in a black and white photo. His hands were folded neatly over his chest, clutching a small wooden toy. I slammed the lid shut and stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Maybe it was a dummy. Some elaborate prop to scare explorers. Yeah, that had to be it. I just needed to prove it to myself. I forced myself to move to the next coffin, the unease in my stomach now clawing at my insides. The second one was slightly larger. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a little girl, no older than 10. She was dressed in a lacy white dress, the kind you'd wear to a wedding or a funeral. Her dark hair was braided neatly over one shoulder, and her hands were clasped around a small porcelain doll. Her eyes were closed, and her face looked so peaceful, like she was just sleeping. But there was no rise and fall of her chest, no warmth to her skin. I backed away again, my flashlight flickering, as if it was reacting to the growing panic inside me. My brain screamed for me to leave, to abandon this nightmare and run back to the surface. But something kept me rooted there. Maybe it was the need to understand, or maybe I was just too scared to move. The third coffin was even larger. This one had to hold an adult. I hesitated. Every part of me begged to stop, but I leaned forward and lifted the lid. A man, mid-30s, maybe 40. He had sharp features, high cheekbones. He wore a dark suit that was slightly frayed at the edges. His hands were clasped over his stomach, and his skin was just as pale as the children's. The fourth coffin was identical in size, and I already knew what I'd find before I opened it. Sure enough, inside was a woman, likely in her 30s. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and a serene expression. She wore a simple dress, the fabric worn but clean. Her hands held a small bouquet of dried flowers. A family, 2 parents, 2 children, lying here in this dark, forgotten cave, as if they belonged here. I staggered back and pressed myself against the wall, my breathing coming in short, ragged gasps. My flashlight trembled in my hand, causing jittery shadows across the walls. I didn't know what to think, what to believe. Who were they? How long had they been here? And why? I crouched down, trying to steady my breathing, when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Carved into the rock wall above the coffins was a message, etched in jagged, uneven letters. "We wait for the light." The words sent a chill down my spine. They didn't make sense, but something about them felt final. I stood there for a long time, staring at the coffins, the message, the family frozen in time. A million questions raced through my mind, but I had no answers. I stood frozen, my flashlight beam trembling against the jagged letters carved into the wall. The silence pressed against me. And then the air shifted. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a vibration, a faint stirring. I turned back towards the coffins, and the lids were moving. It was subtle at first, a faint creak of wood that could almost be mistaken for the groaning of the cave itself. But then the lids slid open, one by one, as if something inside was pushing them aside. My legs locked in place, my breath caught in my throat. The man sat up. Quickly. Very quickly. It scared the hell out of me. His pale face turned toward the woman, who was rising in a slower manner. The children followed, their small, frail forms unfolding like marionettes. None of them spoke, but their heads swiveled in unison, their empty, unblinking gazes scanning the cavern. I dove behind a cluster of rocks, barely daring to breathe. My flashlight was still on, and its faint glow threatened to give me away. I fumbled to switch it off, plunging myself into darkness again. My pulse pounded in my ears as I pressed my back against the cold, damp stone, trying to make myself as small as possible. Do you smell that? A voice broke the silence, smooth and cold as the cave walls. It was the man. His voice echoed strangely, like it didn't quite belong in this world. Yes, the woman replied. Her tone was softer, almost sing-song, but it carried an edge that made my skin crawl. Something fresh, warm. A pause. A man, one of the children said. He's close. I clenched my teeth to keep from gasping. My hand crept to my mouth, covering it to stifle the sound of my panicked breathing. The sound of shifting movements filled the cavern as the family climbed out of their coffins. Their footsteps were deliberate but eerily soft, like they barely touched the ground. I dared to peek out from behind the rock just for a second. The faint glow of their pale skin was the only thing visible in the darkness, like a ghost gliding across the cavern floor. He must be near the entrance, the man said. We should block it. He'll come to us when there's no other way. A cold dread hit me. That was my escape route. I waited, barely breathing, as the sound of their movements grew distant. I imagined them stacking rocks, dragging debris to seal me in, their pale faces set with grim determination. My heart sank. They were cutting me off from the world above, trapping me here in the darkness. For a long moment, I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just seen and heard. None of it made sense. People don't just wake up from coffins. They don't sit up like that. Don't smell their prey. And yet here I was. I needed to think, to plan, but my thoughts were scrambled by sheer terror. The only clear thing was that I couldn't go back the way I came. I'd have to go deeper, find another exit, if one even existed. I gritted my teeth and turned my flashlight back on, angling the beam low to avoid giving away my position. The light flickered, as though the batteries were struggling, but it held steady enough to guide me forward. I crept into one of the narrower tunnels leading away from the main chamber, each step feeling like I was plunging deeper into a nightmare. The tunnel was tight, forcing me to crouch and sometimes crawl on all fours. The rock pressed in around me, and the air grew heavier with each passing moment. Every sound was amplified. The scrape of my boots, the rasp of my breath, the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. I tried not to think about the family, about their pale faces and their haunting voices, but their words echoed in my mind. Do you smell food? They'd asked. I shuddered. I didn't dare look back. The idea of seeing one of them creeping after me, their glowing faces appearing out of the dark, it was too much. The tunnel twisted and turned, sometimes widening into small chambers, other times narrowing, to the point where I had to squeeze through on my stomach. I lost all sense of direction. The further I went, the more disoriented I became. Every now and then, I thought I heard faint voices behind me, carried by the twisting passages.
He can't go far. He'll tire soon.
I shook my head, trying to block them out. They couldn't know where I was, just my mind playing tricks on me. That's what I told myself anyway. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a larger chamber. The air was thicker here, and the smell of damp earth was overpowered by something else. Blood. My flashlight lit up the space, revealing a gruesome sight. Bones, piles of them, scattered across the floor like discarded trash. Some were old, yellowed, and brittle, while others looked disturbingly fresh, with scrapes of flesh still clinging to them. My stomach lurched, and I gagged, clapping a hand over my mouth to stop from retching. This was their lair, their feeding ground. I was not the first person they'd trapped down here, and I wouldn't be the last. A faint sound made me freeze. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from the tunnel I'd just crawled through. I killed my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, blending into the darkness as best I could. My heart thundered in my chest, so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the faint sound of breathing. A low, raspy inhale, followed by an exhale that almost sounded like a sigh.
Close,
the man's voice murmured, so quiet it was almost a whisper.
He's close.
I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I pressed my back against the cold rock, willing myself to disappear into the darkness. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and then a soft chuckle.
You can't hide forever.
The sound of their footsteps faded as they moved deeper into the tunnels. Searching, I stayed where I was, too terrified to move. My mind raced, desperate for a plan, but all I could think about was the growing certainty that I was not getting out of here alive. The footsteps faded, but I didn't dare move. My back was pressed so hard against the jagged wall that I could feel the uneven rock digging into my spine. My breaths were shallow, measured, and quiet, the kind you take when you know any sound could give you away. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard faint whispers, like the family was speaking to one another, but their words were impossible to make out. I had to keep going. Sitting here would only delay the inevitable, and I didn't like my odds if they came back this way. Turning on my flashlight as dimly as possible, I scanned the chamber. The bones scattered across the floor gleamed dully in the faint light, each one a silent warning. Leave if you can. I pushed forward, crawling into the next passage, which was narrower and steeper than the last. The walls seemed to press against me more tightly now, like the cave itself was conspiring to trap me. My hand slipped on the damp rock, and my legs ached as I scrambled deeper into the earth, further from anything that felt remotely safe. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to turn around, to go back, but I couldn't. Not with them somewhere behind me. Their pale faces, and those dead, unblinking eyes. As I crawled, I started hearing things again. Faint sounds, a soft chuckle, the scrape of movement echoing down the tunnel. They were close.
Come back,
the man called.
You'll only make this harder.
I gritted my teeth and kept moving. My palms stung from scraping against sharp edges, but I didn't care. Pain was better than stopping, better than being caught. Another voice, the woman's this time, drifted toward me.
You're only tiring yourself out, dear. It won't help.
It felt like the air around me grew colder the deeper I went. The passage opened into another chamber, but it wasn't relief I felt. It was dread, because the chamber wasn't empty. They were there. The family, all four of them, standing perfectly still, their pale faces turned toward the tunnel I'd just crawled out of. My breath caught in my throat as I scrambled backward, but it was too late. Their heads snapped in unison, their unblinking eyes locking onto mine.
There you are,
the man said, his lips curling into a slow smile. I didn't think. I just ran. The tunnel was tighter now, my shoulders scraping against the walls as I stumbled forward. The air smelled sour like rot, and every breath burned in my chest. Behind me, I could hear them moving, not running or chasing, just walking. Their footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, as if they knew I had nowhere to go.
You're going the wrong way,
the little boy said, his voice echoing unnaturally through the passage.
There's nothing for you down there.
I ignored him, pressing forward even as the passage grew steeper, more jagged. My flashlight flickered again, and I smacked it against my palm, muttering a desperate curse. The beam steadied, but I knew it wouldn't last much longer. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, closer.
We don't have to do this,
the woman said.
Come back and we'll make it quick.
I couldn't stop myself from looking back. Just a glance. There they were, crouched low in the tunnel, their pale faces hid by my dying flashlight. The children grinned at me, their teeth unnervingly white, and the man tilted his head, watching me and smiling. I scrambled forward, my hands and knees slamming against the rock. I wasn't even thinking anymore, just moving, desperate to get away. The tunnel curved sharply, and then impossibly. There it was. Light. A faint circular beam of sunlight spilled through a crack in the ceiling, cutting through the oppressive darkness like a lifeline. My heart surged. I didn't think about how it made no sense for sunlight to be down here. I didn't care. It was light, and I was going to reach it. I staggered into the chamber, the sunlight warming my face for the first time since I'd entered this nightmare. My legs trembled as I stood upright, my back straightening for the first time in hours. The circle of light was small, no more than a few feet wide, but it felt like stepping into another world. The footsteps stopped. I turned slowly, my breath hitching as I saw them emerge from the shadows, one by one. The man, the woman, the children. They surrounded the beam of sunlight, standing just outside its reach. Their faces were expressionless now, but their eyes gleamed with something cold and calculating.
You think this will save you?
The man asked. I didn't answer. The woman smiled, tilting her head as she studied me. It's clever, but cleverness won't keep the sun from setting. The little girl giggled. This is a fun game. We can wait. They didn't move closer. They just stood there. The man folded his arms, and his smile widened. The sun won't last much longer. I looked up, my eyes tracing the beam of light to its source. It was already fading, the edges of the circle growing dimmer as the minutes ticked by. I didn't know what to do. I sank to my knees in the center of the light, my body trembling. The laughter started then, soft and cruel, echoing off the walls of the cavern. It came from all of them, their voices blending together in a haunting symphony. I closed my eyes, my breath ragged. There was no escape, no way out, and the sun would soon be setting. The sunlight was shrinking, minute by minute, and I could feel my time slipping away. The circle of light that had been my shield was now barely big enough for me to sit in. I hugged my knees, my flashlight dead at my side, and I stared at them. They were patient. The man stood just outside the fading light, his pale face stretched into a smug smile. His wife was beside him, her head tilted slightly, studying me like I was some kind of exotic animal in a cage. The children stood close to their parents, silent and still, their dark eyes fixed on me. Every so often, the little girl would giggle softly, the sound like nails dragging down my spine. The circle of protection was shrinking, inch by inch, and with every bit it receded, the family stepped closer. The boy was the first to move. His small, pale foot stepped into the shadow just beyond the edge of light. Then another step, and another. He stopped just short of the shrinking circle, grinning at me. You smell scared, he said. It's good. Fear makes it sweeter. Enough, darling, the woman said. She placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and smiled down at him. Let him have his last moments in peace. They were waiting for the light to die, waiting for me to be swallowed by the darkness they thrived in. I clenched my jaw, my mind racing. I couldn't let this be the end. There had to be something I could do. The circle of light shrank again. The woman stepped closer, her bare feet gliding soundlessly across the rocky floor. She was only a few feet away now, and the smile on her face was sharper. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to do anything but just sit here and wait to die. My hands fumbled at my chest, clutching at my jacket like it could somehow shield me. And that's when I felt it. The crucifix. The small silver cross I always wore on a chain around my neck. The one my grandmother had given me. I'd forgotten it was there, buried beneath layers of fabric. My fingers wrapped around it instinctively, and for a moment I hesitated. Did I really believe it would do anything? It was just a symbol, just metal. But I didn't have any better ideas. I pulled the crucifix free, the chain glinting faintly in the dying sunlight. The movement caught their attention immediately. The man's eyes narrowed, and the smile slipped from his face. My hand trembled as I held the crucifix in front of me. the silver catching the last rays of sunlight. The woman's expression darkened, and she took a cautious step back. "Put that down," she said, her voice no longer soft. I didn't. I stood slowly, the shrinking circle of light barely large enough to hold me upright. The children hissed, their faces twisting into something that was no longer human. I stepped forward, holding the crucifix out like a shield, and the reaction was immediate. The man recoiled, his face contorted with anger and fear. "That won't save you," he growled, but his voice wavered. I took another step, and they all took a step back, hissing and snarling like cornered animals. The light was almost gone now, just a faint glow around my feet. But the crucifix seemed to hold its own power. They wouldn't come closer. "Stay back," I said, my voice trembling but firm. The man lunged forward, but as soon as the crucifix caught the faintest glint of light, he stumbled back with a guttural snarl. His skin sizzled where the silver had caught him, a faint wisp of smoke rising from his hand. And I didn't wait for him to regroup. Clutching the crucifix like it was my only lifeline, I began moving toward the tunnel. The family circled me, staying just out of reach, their eyes burning with hatred. The children hissed and snapped their teeth, and the woman's face twisted into a mask of rage. My focus was on the tunnel ahead, on putting as much distance as I could between myself and them. Every step felt like a battle, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The crucifix seemed to almost burn in my hand, but I held it tighter. I didn't let it go. The family followed me, their movements eerily fluid, and the tunnel grew wider as I moved, the air cooler and fresher. My heart leapt when I saw a faint glow ahead. The entrance. The way out. They saw it too. The woman lunged forward, but the crucifix drove her back again. Her skin blistering where the light touched her, near what looked like a rose tattoo on her right arm. The children cried out, their voices high and unnatural, and the man's face twisted into a snarl of pure rage. I stumbled toward the entrance, the cool evening air washing over me like a balm. The sunlight was almost gone, the horizon painted with the last streaks of orange and purple. I didn't stop moving. As I crossed the threshold, the family stopped. They stood just inside the cave, their pale faces framed by the shadows, the last streaks of sunlight glinting off their unblinking eyes. For a moment, none of them moved, and then the little boy tilted his head, his hair falling into his face. "Mom, I'm sad. He could have been part of the family." The man stood at the center, his expression unreadable. And I didn't wait. My legs ran toward the car. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I drove faster than I ever had before, the headlights cutting through the thickening dark. And I didn't stop, not even to look back. When I got to town, I couldn't stay silent. I went straight to the local police, stumbling into the lobby, my words tumbling out in a panicked rush about the family in the cave. The officer behind the desk looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "A pale family in a cave," he said, leaning back in his chair. "And they hissed at your crucifix." I nodded, breathless, trying to emphasize how serious this was. They blocked the entrance. They are dangerous. People need to stay away from that place. Look, I swear I'm not crazy. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. Yeah, sure, we'll look into it, he said, but his tone was dismissive. It was clear he didn't believe me. Next, I tried the locals. At the diner, at the gas station, anywhere people would listen. Most humored me with polite nods or nervous chuckles, but I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was just some weird outsider with a wild imagination. Finally, desperate, I went to the church. The priest was old, maybe in his 70s, with a kind but skeptical face. I told him everything. Every detail of the family, the coffins, the shrinking sunlight, and the crucifix. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally, but his expression didn't change. When I finished, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. Son, he said, his voice slow and measured. People often see things they don't understand in moments of great fear. I'm sure what you experienced felt real to you, but it was real, I interrupted, slamming my hand on the desk. They're still out there, waiting for someone else to just wander into that cave. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. I'll pray for you, son, he said simply. His tone was kind, but I could tell he didn't believe a word I'd said. I stood, defeated, and turned to leave. Just as I reached the door, the priest's voice stopped me. That tattoo, he said, his voice suddenly sharper. The one you mentioned on the young woman's arm. What did you say it was again? I turned back, confused. It was a rose, I said. It looked just like a simple black rose. The priest's face drained of color. He sat back heavily in his chair, his hand gripping the armrest. A rose, he whispered, more to himself than to me. His lips barely moved as he muttered, Could be a coincidence. It must be a coincidence. I frowned, stepping closer. What does that mean? Do you know something about them? But he didn't answer. His gaze was distant, fixed on something far beyond the room we were in. I waited, but when it was clear he wasn't going to say anything else, I left. I couldn't stay in that town. Hell, I couldn't even stay in that state. The cave, the family, the priest's reaction. It was all too much. Within a week, I packed up everything I owned and moved halfway across the country. Somewhere new. Somewhere far away from any caves or dark, winding tunnels. I tried to move on, but the memories lingered. I couldn't shake the image of their faces. I kept hearing their voices. I kept the crucifix close, tucked under my shirt at all times, like it was the only thing keeping me safe. And then a few weeks later, I saw the news. It was a short article buried in the local section of an online paper. A series of caves near the area I'd left had collapsed unexpectedly. No one was injured. There weren't any reports of people being inside. But the caves were now completely sealed off. The article mentioned it as a freak geological event or a cave-in, nothing more. But I knew better. The timing, the location. It was too much of a coincidence. I couldn't prove it, and I didn't need to, but I was certain the priest had something to do with it.
Maybe he'd gone back to the cave after I left. Maybe he'd seen something that convinced him I was telling the truth. Maybe he'd done something drastic to make sure no one else would ever meet that family. I'll never know for sure. The priest didn't leave any notes, and the article didn't mention him. But I couldn't stop picturing his pale face when I told him about the rose tattoo. Whatever he knew, whatever he'd seen, I'm glad he did it. Maybe they were crushed by the rocks. Maybe they're dead. But I don't think so. All I can hope is that they're trapped in that place, starving, and that they never get out.